where the funds are coming from. So typically at the fundamental applied research, you have sort of the two at the top and the bottom here, government and industry. And government, and in Canada, government has some really great, strong programs here. There's SR&ED, which is a tax credit for science research and experimental development. There is SDTC, where I was recently working, Sustainable Development Technology Canada. They're working at the technology development and demonstration side and providing non-dilutive capital. There's National Research Council, which does IRAP. There's a host of provincial programs. So there are many different programs at both the federal and provincial level that are supporting these earlier stages. But then once you pass those earlier stages, it really gets handed off into the private finance sector. And the challenge is, while there's still technology risk, it can be very difficult to secure funding. And so typically it's been the area of angels and venture capital, although venture capital has somewhat retrenched in the last few years, and again, more so in Canada perhaps than in other areas. But now what we see a lot of in the venture cap space is venture cap not wanting to invest in pre-revenue companies. So the companies already have to sort of get to revenue and sort of bootstrap on their own to get there, and that's where the challenge can be. Moving on to the next slide. I thought I'd just bring it back to the link between sort of the clean tech investment and greenhouse gas mitigation and carbon, and when does the carbon finance and the carbon projects come to bear. And really the clean tech finance is far before you have real sort of carbon projects or carbon credits that you could actually monetize, because essentially when you're funding clean tech at the early stage, this is sort of the concept that you're funding, so it's not actually reducing much carbon at that point. And this is an SDTC slide that I've put up, and so it's referring to the funding allocation. So when SDTC announces that it's going to fund a project, that means they will start one pilot project, and so you can see that the green line of the actual carbon mitigation is just sort of starting, because through the pilot there may be some carbon that is mitigated or abated in some way, but obviously it's not until that pilot is completed successfully and that technology starts to get into the market that you really start to see the carbon benefits happening. So this is all sort of a precursor to when the carbon projects can be monetized. That said, from SDTC's perspective, they do take a very close look at what the carbon impacts of the different technologies they're funding will be. They do a close accounting, and they continue to monitor the companies and the projects through until the projects have completed, and then also for several years after, as they're getting into the market, so that they can understand what the carbon benefits are. And we have also, through SDTC, worked with the companies to help them monetize carbon and to help them understand how to monetize the carbon benefits that their technologies may be providing. I thought I'd also just show here how SDTC is looking at that. So for a company that's applying to the SDTC program, they require each applicant to estimate the future GHG reductions through prescribed methodologies, which are based on both the accepted ISO and the IPCC standards and practices. From there, in-house, we have a screening and evaluation team that will look at that, will assess the reasonableness of it, and perhaps, in conjunction with the company, adjust it. And then because those future sort of estimates of the carbon reductions are necessarily based on future sales forecasts. right? You've got a technology that will get to market, and so the only way you can really know what the carbon benefit would be is to say, well, essentially we think we're going to have sales of X, in 5 years' time, and that will therefore produce, carbon benefits of Y. So because sales forecasts are inherently uncertain, we then take an overall discounting at this early stage when we're just looking at the projects before they're actually assigned. So we've got discount rates of sort of 86 to 90% that we apply to it. But even with all of the discounts, I mean, I think SDTC is still looking through their portfolio of approximately 200 different technologies of significant carbon benefits, and now some of those technologies that they funded since they were up and running since 2002 are in the market and are realizing those benefits. So I think it's the estimate. The current estimate is between 7 and 11 megatons sort of carbon reduction through the entire portfolio, but obviously that's adjusted on an ongoing basis as new technologies come into the portfolio, as other ones reach more maturity, and other ones may not go forward. So that was sort of again, sort of bringing it back to the link of the carbon finance piece. Now I'm going to sort of jump back again to clean tech and do an overview of what's going on in the clean tech space, and specifically in the clean tech finance space. So there is continued strong growth in this space, and it's really being driven a lot by China and India and these countries that have huge infrastructure development going on, and they're able to sort of leapfrog the development that's happened, in the developed world, if we're going to call it that, so that these technologies, they can immediately go to trying to put in newer, more efficient ones. Obviously, everybody's aware that there's a lot of coal and things in China, but they are now looking at a lot of different ways to try and mitigate it, and they're putting more money toward it than any other region. The other thing, U.S. incentives are sort of stop and go on some of these things, but they have been renewed. So they have very generous tax credits for renewable power generation and biofuels, and those were extended through 2011, and so that again drives a lot of financing through the states. I think another point to note is the recent events in Japan have brought focus back to renewable power, where there's a constant debate on the when you're trying to mitigate carbon as to how much of a role can or should nuclear play, but certainly with the nuclear challenges, it has brought new focus and interest back onto the clean tech side. This slide is looking at government stimulus, and so where Canada is very strong at financing the early stages of innovation and technology development, Canada is not as strong at funding sort of that commercialization and later stages. And so this is just one lens to look through it. This is looking at the green components of national economic stimulus that were introduced in response to the recession through sort of 2009 to 2013. And so the full bar is what was committed. So you can see here USA committed $65 billion, China committed $46 billion, South Korea $32 billion, and so on. You'll see Canada in this grouping ranks at the bottom at committing 0.8 billion. And then the green bar of this is how much has already been spent by year-end 2010. And so there you can see, the States isn't spending their commitments as fast as China, and it gives you a sense as to what the current commitments actually are or have been. And again, our green bar doesn't even show up. I think Canada has spent 17% of that 0.8 billion, which, as I say on this graph, doesn't even show up. So it shows that the later stage commitment to actually driving the demand for these technologies is a challenge in Canada. Now this is looking at it from the other side, the Canadian venture capital industry, which again was traditionally a source of focus for financing clean tech development. And these two graphs you'll see will look very similar. On the left-hand side, what you have is the actual funds deployed from Canadian venture capital funds from 2002 to 2010. So we have a consistent downward trend here. And then on the right-hand side, the green bars, is the funds that the venture capitalists themselves are raising. So there's a sort of 1 to 2 year lag between what they're raising, so on the right-hand side, and then how they would be then deploying that into the market. And so this gives you the sense that, it's not